Welcome to the Story a Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy, encouraging you to be a writer today, not someday.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's the Story a Day podcast with Julie Duffy. This month's theme at Story a Day has been improve, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about something that might make you laugh, about your systems. Are you the kind of person who has systems, or are you rolling your eyes at me right now? There are all kinds in the writing community. It's not the stereotype of people being disorganized artists is not actually universal or something to be, striven for. So actually what we need to strive for is some organization so that we can relax and spend more time on the creative stuff. The reason I was thinking about that this week in particular is kind of sad. I have a writing friend, Mr. Wayne Anthony Conaway, commonly known as Tony, who passed away last week. He was a massive figure in the Philadelphia area writing scene and just a generous and interesting guy. And I always wanted to sit next to him at writing event dinners because just the conversation would always be fascinating. But beyond being fascinating, he was a generous sharer of resources and tips and the things that he had learned over his decades in the writing world. And he's the person who, if you heard me tell a story about a friend who has 25 stories out trying to find their place in the world, being submitted to places all at one time. He always tried to keep a raft of stories out there circulating. And consequently, he was one of the people I knew who had the most acceptances. He didn't get rich from his writing, but monetarily, but I really do think that he was enriched by doing the writing and being part of the community, and he will be very much missed. But the reason I wanted to talk to you about that, quite apart from just, memorializing a friend, is that I started thinking about the fact that Tony always had stories out on the go. He had so many stories in collections and anthologies. And of course, you start thinking, I would love to have a collection to remember him by, but it doesn't exist. And then I started thinking about, well, who has the right to create that? Because, we're his writing friends. We're like, oh, we want to do it. But his family are his heirs. So I don't know if he made any kind of plan for this moment. But I know that it is possible for us to do it. When we go, and we all go, our works will outlive us. They will survive, and somebody is going to have to deal with that or ignore it. If you leave it to your family, it may become a source of guilt to them that there's all this work lying around and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know what your wishes were, or they may ignore it. Or they may do stuff with it that you wouldn't have wanted. Do you want your stories collected and self-published? Do you want your unfinished novel shopped to publishers so that it can, carry on after you're gone? Well, I'm not the only person who's worried about this. Neil Gaiman talked to a lawyer friend of his about 15 years ago and had this friend draw up a kind of boilerplate creative's will. And there are instructions on his website about how to use that. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that post. So some of the things you might think about when you're filling out that creative will are, what do you want to happen? Do you want somebody to track down all of your published stories and create a collection and put together a digital edition of it and make it available, or make it available through one of the print-on-demand services? And that's a big ask of somebody, because if they don't know about the publishing industry already, then they're going to have to learn all that stuff. Or do you have a friend who already self-publishes and does that stuff, and can you name them in this creative will and say, I'd really like Joe to take all of my stories and put them together in a collection and put it up on Amazon and just make it available to my friends? Do you have finished novel manuscripts that you'd really like to see out in the world? And are there some that you really want to stay in the trunk? Write it down. And who would you like to handle that? Who do you trust to know the business as well as the artistic side of things? And if you want everything just to be left in a box and given to your grandchildren or your grandnieces or whoever, then you can write that down too. And you can tell them, you can write them a letter and say, hey, I just thought you might find it interesting. Or if you want to leave them to your local historical society, which I'm sure would love them. I know it sounds morbid and nobody likes to think about the fact that, we're all done here at some point, but we are all done here at some point. And that's okay, right? That's how it works. And that's also worth thinking about in terms of doing your writing. And I know this is a tricky subject because if we put too much pressure on ourselves and say, I've only, I'm 48, how many years do I have left? Which of course we never know. But if you put all that pressure on yourself, it can be really paralyzing because you might not be in a good place to do lots of writing right now. A lot of people aren't. So don't put pressure on yourself, but when you sit down to write, perhaps think about the fact that you don't get these moments back again. I went back to an older story of mine that I was writing when I was in my 20s and realised that I couldn't finish it because I don't remember, well I do, but I'm not really interested anymore in writing the story of that character who was young and just out of college and finding her way in the world, and and I enjoyed writing it at the time, and I could write a story about somebody like that again, but that one, I'm not going back to that one. I only had that moment. If I had finished that story in that moment, it would at least have been complete, and I would have had some real kind of time capsule stuff to work with. So just, think about finishing your stories while you are in the place that you're in at the moment. You don't have to go as far as thinking about mortality, but we're standing in this river, and they say you can't step in the same river twice because it's always flowing. So that's my little encouragement to you this morning, to get your work done and perhaps think about creating a creative will. It's going to be a little overwhelming when you look at it because you're going to start thinking about all the stuff you have and all the different places you have it. So I'll be back in a moment with the Q&A section, which is all about that. If you want to learn to write, don't read another book or article. Start writing. I'm here to invite you to consider the Story a Day 3-Day Challenge. It's a challenge and a workshop that gets people writing and completing stories in just 3 days. And it works. I'm fanatical about getting more and more diverse stories into the world, and I think yours should be among them. If you're feeling the pull to write or level up your storytelling, let me hold your hand through 3 days of short story writing. Check out the 3-Day Challenge at storyaday.org/3DC. Okay, we're back with the Q&A section. When I raised this issue of the creative will in the Story a Day Superstars group, the question that came back was, how do I organise all my stuff? I've been writing for a long time, and this is a little overwhelming. So as somebody who is not naturally organised, but has had to become a little more organised because I'm running Story a Day and I make promises to people and I have to follow up with things and I submit things to journals and I have to if somebody says, yes, we'll take your article, then I have to write, I have to follow up on those promises. And I don't like not following up on promises. So I've had to become more organised. So I've learned a few things that I wanted to share with you. I would love it if you are either an organised person or someone who has acquired organisational skills or who struggles with it. Come over to the blog for this, the link's in the show notes, the blog post for this podcast, and share what you know, what you learn, what you need to know. My first tip that I wanted to share is to try and be as consistent as possible. And I know a lot of creative people don't like that word because it sounds boring, but you want the admin stuff in your life to be boring. so that you're free to use your creative energy on other things. I had a terrible habit in the past of creating new systems all the time. Because, creating the system is the interesting part. Using it and maintaining it is dull. But as I've had more obligations that I need to follow through on, I've realised that reinventing the wheel every time is just crazy chaos. So try to be consistent. I've had one spreadsheet for things that I submit. I didn't get fancy with it. It started out as an Excel spreadsheet. Now it's up on Google Sheets. And it just has kind of like the date I submitted, who I submitted it to, what the pitch was, and maybe a link to where I can find it in my email program. And then I have a column for first contact. So if somebody gets back to me and says, we're thinking about it, I'll put that in there. Second contact, if they get back to me again, or if there's follow-up you need to do. And then there's a column that just says accepted, rejected, or waiting. And when I get a response from somebody, quickly, I'll put in accepted or accepted or rejected. And then I'll have a field that has the date I have to submit it by, things like that, if it was accepted. If I haven't heard from them for a while and I'm going through that spreadsheet, I'll mark it as waiting, so that I know maybe I need to follow up at some point. So that's a very, very simple spreadsheet that I've kept, and I've kept the same spreadsheet since 2016. I do not overcomplicate this, which allows me to go back through my history, and it's actually really good for next month's theme at Story Day, which is Triumph, where we celebrate stuff, because I can go back through that and I can look at all the places and the times in my life when I was actively submitting a lot of stuff, the times when I wasn't. I can see when most of my acceptances happened, and of course it's when I'm submitting lots of stuff, and you can learn stuff from that. But keeping it simple is a really good idea, and keeping it in one place. I keep everything in cloud storage now because I don't trust hard drives. I recommend that you do the same. Which brings me to the next point about organisation, which is that you're never going to have one system to rule them all. Everybody will recommend that you use Evernote or Notion or Asana or Google Drive or Amazon Storage or Dropbox. Everybody's got an opinion on this, where you should store everything, and none of it is comprehensive, because we're going to have different needs. Like when I'm brainstorming, I'm not doing it on a computer, I'm doing it on paper. When I want to share a large video file, I need to store it somewhere that's built for that. So I'm using Amazon S3. When I want to create a PDF document, I do it from Google Drive. So some of my stuff is in Google Docs, and then I convert it into a PDF, and then I store it somewhere else to share with people, and I store it somewhere else for backup. So there's never going to be one perfect system. So think about the outcome that you want. It was revelatory to me in my life when I learned as an adult that the reason you put things away in cupboards is not to hide them from visitors and from your mother doing a room inspection. The reason you put things away is so that you can easily find and retrieve them. This was genuinely a revelation to me when I met somebody as a young adult who pointed this out to me, and I went, okay. And when I started implementing that, it made my life easier. So I'm going to suggest that you think about that. Think about the outcome first. When you are storing and organising your stuff, what is the outcome? Are you storing things so that people can handle them when they get your creative will? Are you storing things so that you can easily find the finished drafts of your stories that you want to send out to publications? Are you, there's all kinds of reasons. Think about the outcome first, and then think about the simplest system with the least friction. So if the simplest system is that you bung everything in a folder on your desktop that syncs to Dropbox and you never have to think about it again, great. If you don't mind running a search on your computer, and if you logically name everything like draft 1, draft 2, finished draft, then that's fine. Another option might be to set up folder structures where you have a folder for fiction, a folder for drafts, a folder for finished fiction, a folder for accepted stories, because you don't want to send them out again to somebody because they've already been published. And then you can put all that information, transfer all that information into your spreadsheet or table. Now you're going to say to me, but Julie, I have paper files too. I have a file cabinet full of drafts and paper stuff and notes. Fine. Recreate the same buckets everywhere. If you have digital files and paper files, just recreate the buckets. If you have a file for fiction, that's hard to say. If you have a file for fiction, and inside that file for fiction you have drafts, finished drafts and accepted stories, recreate that with your paper files. Try and keep the same architecture everywhere across all of your platforms, anywhere you save stuff, and then you don't have to think about it. Like, did I keep it in? You just don't have to think about it. So retrieving information that way is really helpful. Keeping things, in terms of the tools, everyone has their favourite tool and they'll tell you to use it. None of that matters until you have an idea in your head about what you want to retrieve the information for and how you want it to structure it. And once you've done that, you can recreate that structure, whether you're using Trello or folder structure on your hard drive or Scrivener. It makes it so much simpler. If all of this is overwhelming you, pick a function and start putting your organizational ideas together for that function. So for example, if you're suddenly thinking, I do want to make a creative will and I do want to find all of my stories and put them somewhere so that they can be put together into an anthology either when I get round to it or after I'm gone. What I would suggest to you is, instead of trying to recreate everything, create a new folder now. Draw a line under the date today in your mind and just create a new folder somewhere that is called, I know somebody who calls this clean sweep. She'll do this. She's like, when I start reorganizing something, I create a new folder called clean sweep and everything goes into that in its new structure. So you could just create a new folder dated today or called clean sweep or called getting organized or whatever. And just now, from today on, every time you come across a story, say for example, you're doing this idea that you want to gather all of your finished drafts, just create a place for them. And every time you come across one, I have to remember to put it in my clean sweep folder, or I have to remember to put it in my creative will folder, or whatever, just and bung it in there. And don't worry about doing a massive clean out of your hard drive today. Just start doing a little bit and be consistent about it. And make some notes for yourself. That's the other thing I've learned, is that I spend so much time inventing new systems that I forget what I've done. So every time I do a new thing now that has a process to it, has more than a couple of steps, I write it down and I keep them all in one place and I call them all something workflow so that I can find them again. So for example, when I have a guest on the podcast, I've created a workflow for that so that I don't forget any of the steps. I don't have to reinvent them. I don't have to waste energy remembering to send them the call information, to send them the information about the date it's going live, all that kind of stuff. When I submit a story to a publication, I have a workflow for that now so that I remember to put the information into my spreadsheet. So there's a whole bunch of checkboxes, and there's, find out whether or not they want a cover letter, write the cover letter, clean up, make sure the manuscript is in their preferred format, whether it's Times New Roman or Courier or whatever. Send the thing, put it in the spreadsheet, follow up 2 weeks later, that kind of thing. So set yourself a reminder to follow up 2 weeks later, that kind of thing. Move the file to your submitted drafts folder. So anytime you create a process for yourself, anything that you will do again, whether it's submitting or working with a critique partner or anything that you do, create a workflow for yourself. Put some, put a list of all the things you're supposed to be doing. And then next time when you run across, for example, in my example that I was using, when you run across a finished draft, you're like, oh, I should put that in my folder of things that I want to put together in a collection. You're like, oh, what did I do with that? Search your computer for the word workflow, or pull out your paper file that says workflows and look through it, and you'll see, okay, so last time when I wanted to keep track of a story to put it into an anthology later, I did these steps. Here's where the folder is. Here's what I named it. Here, like naming conventions can be really helpful. If you call everything the same type of name, it's much easier to search for things later. So anyway, that's some of my thoughts on that. Workflows I find very useful because we are creative people and you can spend a lot of time reinventing the wheel. So none of this sounds like something that's going to help you get your writing done this week. This may turn into a massive distraction this week, for which I apologise, but putting systems in place and creating friction-free, stress-free, templated ways of working really do free up your energy later for when you need to write a story or gather your energy for the courage that it takes to actually submit a story. If you waste that energy fretting about where did I put it and why can't I be more organised and then you're not going to have the courage. You're not going to have the energy reserves to have the courage to submit your story. If you can create a nice environment for yourself inside your computer or inside your files, then you're going to free yourself to be more creative later. I would encourage you to think about the future version of yourself and how pleased they will be when they go to grab a story for a quick submission deadline that's roaring down at them. You're like, I know I've got a story about a minotaur somewhere. When your future version of yourself can easily find that story and be able to check their spreadsheet to see if they've submitted it before, your future version of yourself is going to be so pleased with today's version of yourself. You're going to pat yourself on the back and say, thank you, past me. So I don't know what the best organisation system for you is, but to highlight, think about the outcome you want to achieve. Try and be as simple and friction-free as possible. Recreate the same buckets across all of the places that you save things. Create workflows for any task that you're going to do more than once. Review things regularly. I didn't talk about that, but obviously you're going to have to put a date on your calendar, like once a month or something, maybe twice a month, to just have an admin day where you go through and check that everything's in the right place from the last 2 weeks. Again, none of this stuff sounds like fun, but it will pay off. There are my organisational tips. I'd love it if you came over to the blog and tell me how you organise things. Tell me what you struggle with. And if you are an organisational whiz, tell me what I've got wrong. Give me better systems and share that. That thing that comes easily to you doesn't come easily to everybody. Share the wealth. I'd love to get you to come over and comment. The link is in the notes. That's what I have for you this week. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week and of course, keep writing.